The night felt like cracked glass. The cold cut through the skin, and the fog swallowed the open field where the circus had stopped long ago. In the middle of it all, an old radio crackled on top of a wooden bench near the crooked entrance to the trailer lot. The antenna was broken, the shell covered in rust, but even so it played a scratched-up version of Jingle Bells, like someone dragging a key across a vinyl record. The boy heard the sound before he saw the lights. He was about 15, wool beanie, cheap jacket, hands stuffed in his pockets. He was heading home through a shortcut his mom told him not to take. He saw the glow of glass bulbs up ahead, in the middle of the field everyone called the lot. He vaguely remembered what the place used to be. Circus, fair, something like that. He also knew the rumors. People vanishing, voices at night. That feeling that the field was too empty to be just a field. The lights came on all at once. A row of yellowish bulbs lit up like someone had flipped a switch. The radio music got louder, dirtier, like an invisible hand had turned the volume knob. The boy stopped. The wind carried the smell of wet sawdust and something sweet, like burnt cotton candy. He took 2 steps forward, then 3 more. The main tent was torn in several spots, patched up with pieces of fabric in different colors. The empty bleachers cast long shadows that looked like teeth. Something laughed inside. He thought about turning back. He thought about his mom, the scolding, the warnings. He also thought about how much he hated that small town, and how anything strange was better than one more night exactly the same. He took a deep breath, loosened his hand in his pocket, and walked up to the tent's opening. When he passed underneath, the lights above the ring flickered, like the place was waking up. The floor seemed to shift under his boots. He heard the sound of laughter coming from several spots at once, echoing between the poles. The radio music changed for no reason. Now it was a chorus of thin voices singing a Christmas song in a language he didn't know. The boy tried to call out, but the darkness itself seemed to shove his voice back down his throat. The spotlight spun on its own and pointed at the boy. The tent fabric opened like a mouth. Something came out, a pair of arms too skinny and too long to be human. Tall like a lamppost with fingers that twisted like old bones. It grabbed the boy by the waist with supernatural strength. The boy screamed. It was a fierce, desperate scream, but it died in the air like it had been swallowed. In a second, he was dragged into the tent, disappearing into a darkness that felt alive. Hours later, a dark car pulled up near the same road. The engine stayed on for a moment, warming the inside, until Steve finally shut it off. He looked out the window and let out a low whistle. There's nothing worse than an abandoned circus in the middle of nowhere, he muttered. Almost makes me miss cheap roadside motels. Joanna didn't answer right away. She was watching the distant lights, the way they blinked without rhythm. She pulled her jacket zipper up to her neck, tied her hair back from her face, and only then spoke. The lights shouldn't be on. The circus doesn't look like it's been running for decades. Not long after, a second car pulled up on the road, right next to the Myers siblings' car. It was Cindy Lou Who. She walked up to them, holding a flashlight and a thick coat in her other hand. Her face was marked by the wrinkles of years without proper sleep. Eyes sharp, body tired, but steady. She knew that kind of silence. "He's here," she said. "I can feel it." "You sure it's the same one? The monster from your father's story?" "It's not a story," she replied. "It was the first thing I ever learned about my family." That's how she spoke when it came to the Grinch. No drama, no decoration. Cindy had grown up hearing the name like other kids heard about the boogeyman. The difference was, in her case, the monster was real. Years before she was born, the Grinch had wiped out almost her entire bloodline in a single winter night. Uncles, grandparents, cousins. All that was left was little more than ashes, and one obsessed man, her father. He hunted him for years, she went on, followed his trail from town to town. When he finally found the nest, he used this against him. She pulled a small white wooden box from the inside pocket of her coat. It didn't look special. It was the size of a paperback, the edges worn down, runes carved in simple lines, symbols that looked like snowflakes and flames. "Yule binder," Cindy explained. "My father trapped the Grinch with this. Back then it was enough to send him to hell. Or at least to a piece of it." Joanna leaned in for a better look. "And now it's not? The ritual that held Grinch has weakened." Cindy said, without taking her eyes off the box. The great release that happened on November 20th let all kinds of monsters loose. It's like the Father of Winter is moving in the shadows. Hell opened its doors to our world. Some things escaped, and the Grinch is one of them. Steve ran a hand over his face, tired. So the creature that wiped out your family is back, and it picked this circus? Weird taste. He always picks happy places, Cindy said. Or places that should be. He's an old thing, a parasite. He feeds off the idea of celebration, of hope. The bigger the promise of joy, the more he wants to ruin it. Joanna looked back at the field and thought about the reports they'd gotten. People disappearing near there. Laughter at night. Kids waking up in the middle of the night saying the green boogeyman was calling them to play. None of it matched a werewolf or a normal ghost. They walked to the entrance where a broken sign still showed the faded name of the place. The worn-out letters spelled something like the Great Traveling Exhibition, but someone had crossed out the rest in green paint. There were also footprints in the frozen mud. They were long, like someone had been dragging their heels. The smell of rust and something sweet came from inside. Joanna crouched and stared at the main tent. He's not just here. He's spread out. Like an infection. The entire circus is part of him. Cindy nodded. It's all part of the act. The stage, the bleachers, the rides. He was always a frustrated master of ceremonies. Now he's got a whole show to call his own. They stepped under the tent. The air inside was warmer, but no less uncomfortable. The lights cast warped shadows stretching the poles, turning ropes into motionless snakes. The ring looked like it had been disturbed that same day. There were fresh marks in the sand, toppled chairs, a half-inflated red balloon tied to a bench. "Stay sharp," Joanna said, scanning the space. Cindy walked a few steps ahead, like someone stepping back into a memory. She stopped near one of the poles, rested her hand on the torn fabric, closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, she heard a soft call, almost a whisper crossing the ring. It was a man's voice, deep and calm, with a country accent. "Cindy." She froze. "You heard that?" she asked. Joanna and Steve exchanged a quick look. "We didn't hear anything," Joanna said. Cindy knew it. Every muscle told her to run, but her heart clenched in a familiar way. "That's my father's voice," she said, barely breathing. A second call came, a little stronger. "Cindy, honey, I need you." It seemed to be coming from a smaller tent to the left of the main ring, half closed with dark-stained red stripes. The sound came from there, just like the few recordings she still had. "That's my father," Cindy insisted. "He's trapped somewhere in there." Joanna stepped forward to try and grab Cindy's arm. "Cindy, wait. He could be using that against you." But Cindy ran toward the voice. The hunter's hardened face had cracked, giving way to the daughter who never got to say goodbye. She lifted the tent flap and walked in without looking back. The sound cut off instantly. No voice, no music. Just the distant echo of children's laughter, faint, scattered across the bleachers. Steve rushed to the opening right away, lifted the fabric. Inside, only darkness. No Cindy, no flashlight. Joanna came up beside him. Her stomach sank. She felt it too. "The circus isn't empty," she said, staring into the tent's darkness. "It's watching us." The main tent felt darker when Steve and Joanna returned to the center of the ring. The air smelled like damp dust, old wood, and something burnt that reminded them of melted plastic. Cindy's absence hung heavy, like the fabric of the tent had gotten thicker. Joanna ran her hand over the loose strands of a rope, trying to tell if there was movement in the circus or if it was just the wind slipping through the gaps. Nothing moved, but everything felt alert. Steve raised the flashlight and lit the way. The beam revealed rows of clowns standing still under the shadows of the bleachers. They were lined up like soldiers, shoulder to shoulder, their arms hanging at their sides. None of them looked alive. The makeup dripped like paint crying down their faces, and some wore scorched clothes. Dark stains burned into the fabric. What unsettled Steve most were the eyes. There were no eyes. The eyelids were stitched shut with thick thread like someone had forcibly closed each face. "I don't like this," Steve said quietly. "There's nothing to like here," Joanna replied. They weren't like this before. They took a few more steps, and Steve looked away for just a second. When he turned back to the figures, one of them had changed position. Now it was facing them, even without eyes. No sound, no movement, just the certainty that the statue had shifted when no one was looking. "Let's keep moving," Joanna said, pulling the small weapon she carried for emergencies. "We're wasting time." The pair moved between the bleachers. The temperature seemed to drop even more. The tent swayed without wind. Steve pointed to another tent, off to the right. A shadow moved inside, but too quickly for it to be someone walking. The lights flickered in an uneven rhythm, like a failing heartbeat. They approached slowly. Before stepping in, Joanna noticed a large figure nearby, a heavy-set woman wearing a torn purple dress with a beard that reached down to her chest. Except the beard wasn't just a beard. The hair moved on its own, like living strands. They stretched slowly toward the light of the flashlight. The bearded woman lifted her face. Her eyes were deep, empty holes. Joanna stepped back when the strands of the beard reached further, now aiming for her hand, trying to touch her. They were like tentacles covered in coarse fur. "Back up," Joanna warned, raising the gun with the cold iron tip attached to it. The creature stepped forward, and the tentacles dragged along the ground. The moment she moved, Steve swung a wooden baton against her shoulder. The blow was strong enough to knock her sideways. The tentacles shrank and she crawled like a spider, vanishing under the tent. "He's using her as an extension," Joanna said, "and he's going to use the others too." They moved into the next tent. Inside, the knife thrower was standing still, hunched over a table. He looked dead until the blades started to float on their own. First one, then two, then all five that were on the table. They danced in the air, slowly circling the man's head, which didn't move. The blades caught the flashlight's beam and scattered bright flashes around the space. Joanna pulled Steve back before the knives reached them. "He's animating things with his own energy," she said, analyzing it. "This isn't just telekinesis, it's contamination." "I don't know what that means, but I don't want to be a target," Steve said, dodging one of the blades that flew a little too close to his head. The pair left the tent and headed for the next area. From a distance, it looked empty. As they got closer, they saw the archer standing in the center, bow drawn. She wore holiday decorations on her costume, but they were frozen, like they were made of ice. When she raised the bow, the arrow had a crystal tip that glowed pale blue. She had no eyes, just dark slits in their place. The arrow shot out fast. Steve dove to the ground, and the arrow hit a post behind him, freezing half of the metal on impact. The archer readied another arrow. The siblings ran for the exit and didn't stop until the tent was behind them. Laughter began to fill the air. It wasn't human. It came from the ceiling, the floor, the walls. It sounded like someone chewing Christmas lights while laughing. A fluorescent green shadow took shape on the tent above them. It twisted like liquid, shifting size and form. When it spoke, the voice sounded like it came from a throat that didn't breathe. "Joanna." The tone was just like hers, but warped, like an echo inside a tunnel. "So good to see you here." She froze for a moment. The shadow laughed, perfectly copying how she laughed when something really made her laugh. But there, in that dark space, the sound was completely wrong. It was like hearing someone rip your laugh out of your head and use it against you. Joanna raised the gun. "Stop it," she said, firm. The shadow stretched, growing larger. Its edges were jagged and pulsing green. The laughter echoed again. "You really thought I wouldn't see your memories, little light. I love collecting the memories of strong people. You shine so bright when you try to hide the fear." The voice spread across the floor, the ropes, the poles. It felt like it was everywhere at once. Steve took 2 steps to the side, trying to locate the source, but the shadow moved with him, stuck to the tent like it was part of the fabric. "It's not just about killing," the voice said. "It's about putting on the perfect show. And you two just got front row seats." The laugh that followed filled the space like smoke. The circus seemed to breathe with it. The sound vibrated in the air like a cursed trick. Joanna felt her heart race. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. The Grinch had already started the show. The fabric of the next tent trembled like it was breathing. The wind wasn't strong enough for that, Steve grabbed the edge of the entrance and pulled it open. The air inside was cold as ice and smelled like shattered glass. The tent walls were lined with tall mirrors, some stained, others cracked with lines that looked like fine webs. The flashlight's beam multiplied in dozens of reflections that blinded and confused their movements. "I don't like mirrors," Steve said, stepping in slowly. "They don't like you either," Joanna replied, half serious, trying to cut the tension. They moved forward, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Each mirror showed their image with slight distortions that got worse as they passed. In the first panel, Steve just looked pale. In the second, he had deep circles under his eyes like he'd been dead for days. In the third, his reflection was swollen with greenish skin and hollow eyes. Joanna watched her own reflections. At first, she just looked tired. Then she saw herself with red eyes, then with no mouth. And in another panel, her face was made of Christmas ornaments stuck together like flesh. The image smiled with blinking lights inside its mouth. "This isn't just illusion," Joanna said. "He's taking our memories and twisting them." "He can read minds?" Steve asked. "Emotions, at least. Enough to turn them into weapons." The sound of something dragging on the floor made them stop. From one of the taller mirrors, a reflection peeled away. It was Cindy. She looked like she was being dragged by long arms belonging to twisted performers with faces covered in green paint. They carried her across the tent floor like a lifeless mannequin. "Cindy!" Steve called, taking 2 steps forward. Joanna grabbed his arm tightly. "That's not real. Look again." Steve blinked several times. The image shifted. It wasn't Cindy, just cloth tied to wooden pieces. A poorly made puppet built to look human from a distance. "He knows exactly what to do," Steve said, breathing fast. "He wants me to chase after it. He wants you distracted," Joanna replied. "His goal is to wear us down, break us, leave us vulnerable before the final act." She kept moving, keeping the flashlight low. When she looked up, she nearly stepped back. In the mirror ahead, she saw her father. Not how she remembered him, but how he looked in the hospital many years ago, hooked up to tubes with dark bruises on his chest. He opened his mouth and said her name in a trembling voice. "Joanna." The sound was exactly how she remembered it from his final weeks. The pain was the same. Joanna froze. She couldn't even blink. "Hey," Steve said, pulling her shoulder. "It's a lie. He's not here." Joanna took a deep breath, even though her throat felt tighter. "I know," she said, "but it still hurts." Her father's reflection kept calling her. The tent's lights flickered. The floor turned damp for a moment, like melting snow. The voice repeated, now mixed with the Grinch's sharp laugh. It was like someone had stitched a good memory together with a cruel sound, turning it into something rotten. "Let's get out of here," Steve said. "This place is messing with us." They moved toward the end of the tent. The exit felt farther away with every step, as if the space were stretching. When they finally reached the exit curtain, they heard footsteps behind them. Something heavy. Something with enough mass to shake the ground with each step. When they turned, they saw it. A giant clown. But it wasn't a single clown. It was a cluster of clowns fused together. Multiple bodies stuck at the torso, with heads poking out in different directions and arms moving in disorganized jerks. The open mouths had broken teeth and pieces of confetti spilling off the tongues. The legs were one fused block, like they'd been molded from a lump of flesh and cloth. It moved slowly, but with the weight of something that could crush. "Well, that's new," Steve said, gripping the machete. The clown mass let out a sound that was part laughter, part vomit. It dragged forward, and both small and large hands tried to touch the ground at once. Steve stepped in first, swinging the machete hard. He hit one of the creature's arms, and it tore open like old fabric. Instead of regular blood, a green, sticky liquid oozed out, mixed with confetti and little scraps of Christmas fabric. The monster shook its head side to side and tried to grab Steve with 3 hands at once. Steve ducked and struck again, this time at the center of the torso. The body split open and more of the goo poured out. Some of the attached faces wept black ink. "Steve, look out," Joanna warned. The clown mass partially collapsed but tried to drag itself forward with the remaining arms. Steve landed one last blow, slicing the torso apart. The creature began to melt, like it was a sack full of sludge. Confetti flew into the air and rained down like dirty snow. The smell was strong enough to make Steve cover his nose. "He does this on purpose," Steve said. "To wear us down, to disgust, to mess with our heads." Joanna nodded. "It's his style. He turns the ridiculous into fear. And he uses people's bodies like puppets." They moved through a narrow hallway between two tents. Joanna held the flashlight, and Steve walked beside her, weapon ready. They reached the entrance of a smaller tent. Inside, there was only a broken mirror on the ground. The shards of glass glowed green. On the largest piece, something was written in thick, viscous paint. "She is my beloved Christmas companion." Joanna knelt and touched the edge of the glass. The paint felt fresh. "He's using Cindy as part of the ritual," she said. "That explains why he wants her alive, and why he took her so fast." Steve tightened his grip on the weapon. "Then we need to find her before he starts the next part of the plan." Joanna studied the mirror again, as if trying to spot another hidden clue. "He's showing us how much control he has. This message is a taunt, but also a warning. He's saying the circus is his game board, and we're the pieces he's pushing in the right direction." Steve took a deep breath. "Let's keep going, before he tries to play any more games." They left the tent and walked toward the center of the circus. The feeling that the place was alive kept growing. The lights blinked like watchful eyes. The fabric shifted like it was breathing. The poles creaked like bones. Every step echoed like someone was following them. The Grinch didn't need to show his face. He was in everything. He was the maze itself. The circus's central tent loomed ahead like a giant dark lung, inflating and deflating with a heavy rhythm. The red and white stripes were torn, swaying like tired tongues. Steve and Joanna approached from the right side, where the smell of old gasoline and damp meat grew stronger. The ground was marked with footprints that didn't belong to any normal animal. They were long, with thin toes and splattered with patches of green paint. "He wants us to go in," Joanna said, studying the tracks. "This is an invitation that smells like death," Steve replied. They stepped through the main entrance. Inside, the ring was lit by hanging bulbs that flickered like a spinning roulette. In the center of the sawdust circle, a small fire burned with bluish flames. Above it, suspended by rusty chains, a cage swung. Cindy was inside, bound by wrists and ankles, her face bruised and her coat torn. The cage was slowly lowering, like part of a cruel stage trick. "Steve," Joanna whispered, pointing. "We found her." Before they could take another step, a clown horn echoed through the ring. From the upper bleachers, the Grinch appeared. Not his physical form, but a green projection that twisted and laughed. He flipped through the air like a deranged master of ceremonies. He threw confetti that floated and melted before hitting the ground. "Welcome to my show," he said, in a voice that was both childish and deep. "We've got an exciting rescue tonight, featuring a very special guest." Cindy lifted her head. She was pale, but conscious. "Don't get close to the fire," she said, her voice weak. "That's not normal fire." The flame beneath the cage was so intense it made the air shimmer, but it didn't give off typical heat. It was as if it were burning something spiritual, not physical. The cage was lowering a bit faster now. At this pace, she'd be inside the fire in minutes. A group of trapeze artists appeared on the ropes above. They had no eyes. Their faces were smooth, with only 2 holes where noses should have been. Their arms were far too long and bent at awkward angles like dry branches. They moved like spiders, using hooks in their hands to slide along the worn ropes. "We're gonna have to split up," Steve said. "I'll get to the cage, you handle these freaks." "Just don't fall," Joanna replied. "I'm not dragging you back from the bottom of a crocodile pit." Steve looked beneath the cage. It wasn't just fire. A hole was opening under the flames. There was movement inside. Dozens of eyes reflected the light. Creatures that looked like crocodiles took turns snapping their snouts at the wood holding up the fire. It was a living pit, opened just for this act. Joanna stepped forward, raising the cold iron axe. When the trapeze artists slid down the ropes, she struck the first one with a sideways swing. The creature's body split in half, spilling a dark liquid. Even so, the upper half still tried to grab her with its long arms, forcing her to back away. Another trapeze artist came up from behind. Joanna ducked and landed her second strike, slicing off the arm that had started to wrap around her neck. Steve climbed a side platform to reach a rope that looked stronger. He tested the weight by tugging it twice, then pushed off and jumped. The swing carried him closer to the cage. He held on tight, trying to keep control, but the trapeze artists above began shaking the ropes, making his movement harder. "You're terrible hosts," Steve shouted. He swung again and managed to reach the cage. He grabbed the bars with one hand and braced his feet between the metal rails. Cindy looked up. "Use the side latch, the lock's broken," she said. Steve tried to pull the latch but felt something slam into the cage. A trapeze artist had dropped down and grabbed his arm with surprising strength. The creature's skin was cold, like a block of packed snow. Steve kicked the trapeze artist in the chest, sending it falling and swinging on the rope like a limp doll. Down below, Joanna kept fighting. Clowns that had been hiding along the sides began to emerge. They moved slowly, but had long arms and huge hands painted in green. The ground was filling with sawdust mixed with dark blood. Joanna slashed the knee of the first clown that came at her. It collapsed, but the hands kept clawing toward her. Another one tried to punch her in the face with a heavy swing. Joanna dodged and struck its temple with the axe handle. The clown fell, spilling confetti out of its nose. It was like fighting puppets that had learned how to suffer. "Steve, hurry!" she yelled. He managed to unlock the cage with a strong pull. The latch gave and the door swung open. Cindy fell into his arms, but she was heavy and too weak to help. He pulled her toward the rope and tied one of her arms to his own belt. "Hold on. I'm getting you out." Cindy took a deep breath, trying to stay conscious. "Before the artifact, I need to tell you." Steve pulled the rope to swing away from the cage. As they swung, Cindy reached into her torn coat and pulled out a small object made of white wood. It was a box with red symbols etched into it and 3 circular marks along the sides. "Yule binder," she said. "It's my father's. It can trap the Grinch for a while. Doesn't kill him, but it seals him." Steve held the box carefully. The object seemed to vibrate, like it had a heartbeat. "How do you activate it?" 3 synchronized hits: cold iron, salt, and force. But he has to be weakened. If you use it too soon, the box breaks. When Steve and Cindy reached the ground, Joanna had just finished off the last trapeze artist, who collapsed like a soaked rag. The entire ring shook. The lights flickered faster, casting shadows that moved on their own. "He knows we got her out," Joanna said. "The circus is reacting." Steve helped Cindy stand and gripped the binder tightly. "Then let's end this, because now he's furious. And that gives us a shot." The fire changed color, growing taller. The flames rose like green arms. The smell, once just strange, turned suffocating. The circus felt like it was breathing harder, like something huge was waking up just beneath the ground. Joanna wiped her face, streaked with sawdust and blood. "We got Cindy back, now comes the hard part." The circus creaked like it was alive. The ring felt smaller. The air felt heavier. The Grinch was close. Close enough to taste their fear. And now, they had what he wanted: Cindy, and the artifact that could seal him. The light inside the ring went out and flicked back on like someone had unplugged the world for a second. The ground shook. The red stripes on the walls stretched as if they were pulled by invisible strings. The smell of burnt sawdust filled the air. Steve moved Cindy behind him. Joanna raised the axe with both hands. Nothing happened at first. The silence was so heavy, even the fire in the center seemed to lose its sound. Then came the laughter. It started low, like it was underground. Then it rose, passing through the earth, through the stakes holding up the circus, until it exploded at the top of the tent. It was deafening, mixed with hissing and something like the sound of breaking glass. The bulbs at the top lit up all at once, throwing down a shower of white and green light. The shadow there twisted and took shape. The Grinch appeared. He wasn't just a creature. He looked like a circus performance that had melted and come to life. His body stood nearly 2 meters tall. His skin was green, full of ridges and veins that looked like they were trying to push through the surface. His arms were long, thin, ending in hands with sharp fingers. On his back were limbs that looked like the legs of a massive spider. His eyes were 2 yellow orbs, like car headlights. glowing and fading like Christmas lights. His mouth smiled so wide it looked like his face might tear in half. He landed in the ring with a dull thud that made the ground vibrate. "My performers were late," he said with several voices at once. "But that's fine. The main act starts now." Cindy took a deep breath and steadied herself, despite how weak she was. "He's strong," she said. "Too strong." "We're not running," Steve replied. "Not today." The Grinch raised one of his arms. His shadow spilled across the ground like black liquid. The lights shifted to a deep red hue. The entire ring transformed. In place of the bleachers, giant toys rose like parts from a dismantled amusement park. Wooden soldiers with shining swords appeared along the edges. Enormous teddy bears began walking with stiff, jerky movements. A broken-down carousel rebuilt itself and started spinning on its own. The Grinch threw his head back and shouted with joy like he was conducting it all. "He's making the circus dream while awake," Joanna said, "and we're inside the dream." The Grinch leapt and landed near them, kicking up a wave of sawdust. He swung one of the limbs from his back at Steve. Steve dodged just in time and dropped to his knees. The strike left a hole in the ground. The Grinch's mouth opened, and something like trapped laughter escaped as if small souls were trying to break free. Joanna moved first. She gripped the cold iron axe tight and struck the Grinch's arm. The cut split his green skin and released a thick liquid. He pulled back but laughed even louder. "Cold iron. I love when humans try to burn ice," he said. He raised his other arm and unleashed a wave of glowing green confetti. It hit Joanna square in the chest and threw her into the bleachers. Steve ran over and helped her up. "He's reading what we feel," Steve said, "and he's using it." The Grinch moved too fast, teleporting between colorful shadows cast by the toys. He appeared behind them and whispered in Steve's ear using their mother's voice. "You never saved anyone." Steve spun and swung an iron rod, hitting the creature's head. The Grinch spun around but kept smiling. He reached for Cindy, but she stepped back and fired a ritual arrow. The arrow had a dark ice tip glowing with ancient symbols. When it struck the Grinch's chest, his skin burned, and a hiss of steam came from the wound. "That hurts," he said. "And I like it." Cindy knocked another arrow. "He's playing, that's bad, but it means his illusions aren't holding, he's unstable," she said. Joanna looked at the ground and began drawing a circle using cold iron and salt. The salt sizzled in the sawdust like acid. Steve saw the plan instantly. "We'll pull him into the circle. Once he's inside, he loses power," Joanna said. The Grinch noticed the movement and grew restless. He raised his side limbs and slammed them to the ground. The vibration made the carousel spin faster and sent the toys charging forward. The wooden soldiers ran in with swords raised. The teddy bears opened their mouths, revealing metal teeth. Steve stood in front with the machete. He chopped off one soldier's arm and shoved another. Joanna struck a bear, slicing its chest open. A cold wind swept the ring as the Grinch rushed at them. "Draw him in," Joanna said. "Let him come." Steve ran behind the circle. The Grinch followed. The creature lunged, reaching for Steve's head. Steve rolled across the ground and dodged, leading the Grinch into the cold iron and salt circle. The circle lit up. Light rose and wrapped around the Grinch like an invisible wall. The creature slammed into the barrier and screamed. The illusions began to collapse. The bleachers returned to normal. The toys shattered as if they'd never been real. The tent shook. "Now," Cindy said. She pulled out the Yule binder, holding it with both hands despite her exhaustion. Joanna poured salt on the ground and Steve raised the iron bar. "3 hits," Cindy said. "Together." They struck the box with the iron bar as Cindy pressed both hands on the symbols. A deep sound came from the artifact. It wasn't a physical sound. It felt like something was being pulled into the wood. The Grinch tried to break through the circle, but the light burned his skin. He stopped laughing. His mouth opened again, but this time with no joy. Steve pushed the box forward. Joanna reinforced the circle. The Grinch began to shrink. His skin tightened. His limbs folded in. The yellow eyes grew small. The mouth closed into crooked lines. The ring's light focused at the center. The tent filled with cold wind. Cindy struck the binder a 3rd time. The Grinch's body turned into green smoke. The smoke was sucked into the box. The sound of trapped voices vanished. The ring went completely silent. The box grew heavy, then light, and then its symbols sealed shut with a sharp click. Cindy collapsed to her knees. Steve stopped beside her. Joanna leaned on the axe. The circus was quiet. The Grinch was sealed, not destroyed, but trapped. And for the first time that night, the air no longer smelled of death. It smelled like burnt wood and distant snow. The light in the ring went out completely. A second earlier, the Grinch had been pulled into the white box with scorched runes and inverted symbols. Now, the silence that took over the circus was so heavy it felt like it had weight. Steve was breathing hard. Joanna had her hands on her thighs, her body worn out. Cindy was still holding the Yule binder against her chest, as if afraid it might open on its own. The ground shook. One of the bleachers gave way. The tent's ceiling split in a long tear. The circus was collapsing. Not like a place destroyed by battle, like a place that was dying. Every part of the circus felt like it had its own life. And now that life was being shut off, like flipping a switch. "We have to get out," Steve said. The warning was obvious, but no one moved right away. The heat of the fight still buzzed in all three of their muscles. The air was so cold it felt like it was slicing into their skin. A strong smell of blood, wet sawdust, and green paint spread through the space. Joanna took a deep breath and slung the axe over her back. "Let's go, before this place falls on us." They moved quickly toward the exit of the tent. An empty clown dropped from above and turned to dust before hitting the ground. A teddy bear cracked open at the chest and unraveled into strips of fabric. The fake audience the Grinch had created during the illusions began to dissolve into shredded paper. With every step, the circus lost more color, more shape, more presence. Steve looked back. It's like he was the heart of this place. Without him, everything falls apart. "He wasn't the heart," Cindy said. "He was the parasite. The circus was alive in the wrong way. Now it's just going back to what it really is." She spoke without taking her eyes off the box. The white wood was warm. The symbols had closed, but some were still glowing. Joanna noticed the slight tremble in Cindy's hands. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was fear. Deep, real fear that had been trapped inside her for decades. When they stepped out of the main tent, a blast of cold air hit them. The sky was dark. The moon looked hidden behind low clouds. The fabric of the tent shifted like a chest struggling to breathe. Other smaller tents were collapsing on their own. The ropes untied without being touched. The circus was ending. "Is he really sealed?" Steve asked. Cindy tightened her grip on the box, as if testing the weight would answer the question. "For now, this artifact wasn't made for creatures like him. My father said the binder holds for days or weeks. Never more than that, and never without a cost." Joanna turned her face toward her. "A cost for who?" The answer came from Cindy's eyes, not her voice. "For me." They stood in silence for a few moments, watching the circus come apart. The bleacher wood cracked. The tent sagged. The lights went out. The ground seemed to breathe one last time before going still. When the noise faded, the world went so quiet even the wind stopped. Cindy took a deep breath and knelt in the snow. The gesture had nothing to do with weakness. It was a kind of farewell. "He killed my family before I was even born," she said. "My father faced him and won. Sealed him in that box. But the Grinch always leaves someone alive. Not out of mercy. He likes witnesses. He likes to be remembered. He likes to be feared." Steve stood beside her, steady. "He's not going to hurt anyone else." Cindy looked at him with a faint smile. "You don't understand. The Grinch never ends. He comes back like part of the season. It doesn't matter how many times we shove him back to hell. He always finds a crack. Because he's not just a monster, he's a servant, a messenger." Joanna grew tense. "A servant of who?" Cindy ran her hand over the runes on the box. "Of the Father of Winter. The same one you saw in the prophecy. The same one who's coming back with the reindeer. The Grinch was always a shadow of him, always just the tip of a bigger story. That's why he never really died, and that's why now he's stronger. The breach opened a direct path. He didn't have to dig his way up." Steve crossed his arms. "This is getting worse faster than we thought." Cindy nodded. "And that's not all. The old weapons, the sword, the staff. The bell. My father always said they were the only way to destroy the Father of Winter. When the Grinch senses those weapons nearby, he gets nervous. He knows part of what can end his master is waking up again. She opened the box for the briefest second, just long enough for them to see that the green smoke was still trapped inside, swirling like something alive. Then she shut it quickly, almost afraid to hesitate. That's when the box flickered, and the air around it vibrated. A faint voice escaped from within. It wasn't loud. It wasn't layered with many voices like before. It was just a whisper. "Seek where the cold builds false men." The voice faded quickly. Cindy closed her eyes. Joanna stepped back. "He's trying to give us one last clue," Joanna said. "Or trying to confuse us." Steve shook his head. "That doesn't sound like confusion. Sounds like a warning." Cindy wiped a cut from her forehead. The Grinch always loved riddles. But this one makes sense. He's talking about the next breach, the next monster. Steve repeated the words slowly. "False men made of cold, that's snowmen." Joanna looked up. "And Montreal. Cindy pointed the box at them, as if confirming the logic. "The snow sculptures. The streets full of white statues. The night wind that sounds like it's whispering. And snowmen that stare back. This can only mean one thing. Montreal is the next place. And that's where you'll find the first jewel of the Magi." Joanna tucked her hair behind her ear. The prophecy said the first piece would be revealed by a defeated enemy. Steve took a deep breath. "Then that's it. Montreal. Living snowmen. Another attack on the way." Cindy stood up slowly. Behind her, the circus had been reduced to dirty snow and torn canvas. It looked more like an abandoned carcass than a place where anything had ever lived. "I'm going with you," she said. "I'm not stopping until the last servant of the Father of Winter falls." Joanna looked at her, without pride and without doubt. "Then let's start now." They walked away from the field. The moon came out from behind the clouds. Snow fell gently. The circus stayed behind like a nightmare turned to dust. The Yule binder glowed in the dark, and the path to Montreal began to open before them. So what did you think of the battle inside the circus in Butte, Montana, and the way the Grinch tried to turn joy into despair? Let me know in the comments. Your opinion helps keep this dangerous road alive, the road the Myers siblings walk, night after night. If you enjoyed this hunt, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Every subscription helps bring in more cases, more creatures, and more mysteries that a lot of people would rather pretend don't exist. But they do, and someone has to face them. Speaking of facing things, the next stop for the Myers siblings won't leave time to catch their breath. Right before he was pulled into the binder, the Grinch left a clue. A riddle about faces made of snow, white statues, and a royal mountain. Now Steve, Joanna, and Cindy are following that trail to a city that knows November's cold all too well. Montreal. There, something is turning snowmen into monsters.